Accessing peace. Existing without violence, with the ability to calmly resolve conflict. Downloading love. An overwhelming, deep, positive affection towards others. Activating liberty. Living your life as you see fit without infringing on the lives of others.
Welcome to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio, online at lppradio.com. I am your host, Darryl W. Perry, the Liberty Penguin, the Wombat, the uncut cocaine of libertarianism. And do you know what day it is? Yeah, that's right, it's Friday. It's the day that I answer your questions. And I've got several of them. And generally, I take these in the order that they come in. I'm going to take them out of order today, just because I know that, there's one or two of these questions that can be quite lengthy as far as the answer, and one that I know will be very short, but the one that I know is going to be very short is the final question on the list, so I figure I'll move it to the front. Question is, will you be at the upcoming NHLP 2017 convention? I believe he means the LPNH 27 convention that's actually happening tomorrow, March 18th. Although if you're listening to this after the 17th day of March, then it happened previously. But yes, I will be there because I'm the current chair of the Libertarian Party of New Hampshire, and it is my duty to be there. Even if it wasn't my duty to be there, I would still be there. Moving on to the other questions, I'm still going out of order just a little bit here, just because I want to make sure that I have time to answer the questions here. Question 2, when was your aha moment when you realized coercive governance is immoral? And this is actually a variant of a question that I've had variations on, like, how did you discover libertarianism? But I've never had this particular version of the question. And it's a question that I don't think I've ever had before. And I would really say that in order to answer this question, I have to give some backstory. And I'll, retell the story of how I became a libertarian. So I grew up sort of realizing that there wasn't really much difference between Republicans and Democrats. And I think I was lucky in that when I started paying attention to politics around the election of Bill Clinton in 1992. And, there was this quirky guy that was a billionaire that, rented time on television to show us his pie charts. Look here, this here is pie chart. And there's a lot of you that are listening that probably have no clue who Ross Perot is or why he was fascinated with pie charts, but he was. And I remember being intrigued by Ross Perot and thinking, oh, well, he's a businessman. America's kind of like a business. I didn't realize it was a, business based on coercion. More on that later. But I remember thinking, okay, it seems like a businessman should wind up, being in charge of, like this giant business thing. And, unfortunately, Ross Perot did not wind up getting elected. I think he would have been a much better president than Bill Clinton or George H.W. Bush or George W. Bush, who followed Bill Clinton. But anyway, that's about when I started paying attention to politics, was around that 1992 election. And then 2 years later, there was this thing that I still, when I go back and look at the statistics and see that 85% of the members of the U.S. House of Representatives wound up getting reelected, I laugh at the term that was used, the Republican Revolution, where the Republicans just cleaned house. Again, 85% of people that ran for re-election wound up getting reelected. So it wasn't this, clean sweep that some people want you to believe that it was. But even if it was, there was something that happened in either late 1994 or early 1995 that baffled me. The congressman from the area that I lived in Birmingham, Alabama, had been serving as a Democrat, got reelected as a Democrat. The Republicans took the majority, and he decided that he was a Republican all of a sudden, but he didn't change his position on anything. And so that led me to the conclusion that, wait a second, if he's not changing his position on anything, there's not really any difference between the Republican and Democrat thing here. But I still, for several years, thought, well, maybe Republicans aren't quite as bad as Democrats, but libertarians are still better. Now, I didn't think that immediately. I thought that after I found out what a libertarian was, that, libertarians are better than either Republicans or Democrats. But for several years, I was like, Republicans are better than Democrats. And I didn't know about, any of these other alternatives. Then in 1999, I was listening to the Neil Bortz show when Neil Bortz actually was a libertarian. And I heard him mention the Libertarian Party. And I remember, looking on this thing called the internet that was still fairly new back then. And I found the world's smallest political quiz. And I took that quiz, and it showed that I was a 7100, meaning that on economic issues, I scored a 100. On the personal issues, I scored a 70, putting me on the border between conservative and libertarian. And so, because I knew that I wasn't a Republican, and that, Republicans were kind of Democrats, but slightly different and maybe a little bit better on some things, I wound up joining the Libertarian Party. And, as they say, the rest is history. Kind of. It was several years after that I got a copy of a book that I'll tell you about here in just a moment on Peace, Love, Liberty Radio, because it was that book that was kind of the aha moment. Stay tuned. There's more.
In 2115 New England, there are no borders, no states, and no regulations, yet never has a more peaceful and prosperous place existed. But Mr. Drake's security company has seen better days. Faced with the prospect of waning power, Mr. Drake intends to replace the anarchy of New England with a government. But at what cost? Will anybody care? And can anyone stop him? Anarchy in New England by Joe Jarvis is available from Amazon.com and all major bookstores.
Are you tired of governments murdering people around the world? Stop using their money. There is an alternative. Bitcoin is a stateless, free market, non-political currency. Bitcoin cannot be inflated or controlled by any government. By using their money, you are helping the state. Stop doing it. You have an incredible alternative available now. Learn it, use it, spread it. Get started with Bitcoin at weusecoins.com. That's weusecoins.com.
You're listening to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio, online at fppradio.com.
Welcome back to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio, online at fppradio.com. I am your host, Darryl W. Perry, the Liberty Penguin, the Wombat, the uncut cocaine of libertarianism. I'm answering your questions, and I'm doing so in a way that hopefully gives you a little bit more backstory to, other than just, here's the answer with no real context. Just gave the backstory before answering the question, when was your aha moment when you realized coercive governance is immoral? So in about 2004, after I'd been a libertarian for several years, Libertarian Party member for several years, I got a copy of a book called The Law by a Frenchman who most Americans call Frederick Bastiat, although the correct pronunciation would probably be Frederic Bastiat. And I remember reading the book. It's not that long of a book. It's in the public domain. You can find a copy for free online. I actually sell a copy through the Bitcoin store at btcshop.fpp.cc. You can also find it on Amazon if you don't want to pay with Bitcoin. But I remember reading the book, and I'm going to read a small section here. And Bastiat uses a term that most people would call theft, but he uses the term plunder. And I think everybody knows or understands what plunder means. He says there are two kinds of plunder, legal and illegal. I do not think that illegal plunder, such as theft or swindling, which the Penal Code defines, anticipates, and punishes, can be called socialism. It is not this kind of plunder that systematically threatens the foundation of society. Anyway, the war against this kind of plunder has not waited for the command of these gentlemen. The war against illegal plunder has been fought since the beginning of the world, long before the revolution of February 1848. Long before the appearance of even socialism itself, France had provided police, judges, gendarmes, prisons, dungeons, and scaffolds for the purpose of fighting illegal plunder. The law itself conducts this war, and it is my wish and opinion that the law should always maintain this attitude towards plunder. But it does not always do this. Sometimes the law defends plunder and participates in it. Thus, the beneficiaries are spared the shame, danger, and scruple which their acts would otherwise involve. Sometimes the law places the whole apparatus of judges, police, prisons, and gendarmes at the service of the plunderers and treats the victims, when he defends himself, as a criminal. In short, there is a legal plunder, and it is of this that Monsieur de Montalembert speaks. This legal plunder may only be isolated, or rather may only be an isolated stain among the legislative measures of the people. If so, it is best to wipe it out with a minimum of speeches and denunciations in spite of the uproar of the vested interest. Now, what exactly does he mean by legal plunder? Well, most people now would consider that to be taxation. So, in short, you've got a man that nearly 170 years ago said taxation is theft. But he did not use the term taxation. He did not use the term theft. He said there is legal plunder. There's another passage from the law that I will read from you. I just have to find it, so give me 1 second. Bastiat continues. He says, now, legal plunder can be committed in an infinite number of ways. Thus, we have an infinite number of plans for organizing it. Tariffs, protection, benefits, subsidies, encouragement, progressive taxation, public schools, guaranteed jobs, guaranteed profits, minimum wage, a right to relief, a right to the tools of labor, free credit, and so on and so on. All these plans as a whole, with their common aim of legal plunder, constitute socialism. Skipping down a little bit, or several pages, if you have the book, he says, the question of legal plunder must be settled once and for all, and there are only 3 ways to settle it. The few plunder the many, everybody plunders everybody, or nobody plunders anybody. And he then goes on to describe these 3 different options. And my favorite is no legal plunder. This is the principle of justice, peace, order, stability, harmony, and logic. Until the day of my death, he says, I shall proclaim this principle with all the force of my lungs, which, alas, is all too inadequate. And then there's a footnote noting that Bastiat knew that he was dying of tuberculosis, So when he says, I'll proclaim this with the last of my breath, he knew that he did not have very many left. And it was reading this book that was kind of my aha moment when I realized that, taxation really is theft. Although I didn't actually put those words in that order until several years later. But that should really show that, governance or coercive governance is immoral. If I don't have the right to do a thing, you don't have a right to do the thing. If I don't have a right to, get a group of my buddies to do a thing, then nobody has a right to get a group of their buddies to do the thing. Another book that was really beneficial was Healing Our World by Dr. Mary Ruwart. Going on to the next question, and this, as Bastiat says, could be discussed in depth on and on, but I'll go to the next question. How did your family react when they discovered that you had embraced the ideas of voluntarism and liberty? And, I'm not really sure because I didn't ask, how did you react? Now, I can tell you from sort of experience that I think for a little bit my dad thought I was kind of crazy until he realized that my ideas and the ideas that I've come to adopt make sense. And I think in a lot of ways my dad is on board. There's not a lot of my other family that I necessarily talk to on a regular basis, so I can't tell you what they think or anything along those lines. But then there's other family that I'll talk to, but just not about political stuff. So, different with different parts of the family. There are more questions coming up next here on Peace, Love, Liberty Radio.
Are you sick of government lackeys who say you didn't build that? Are you tired of elitists who think you need a government permission slip for everything? Everything you do is an A to B conversation, and the government should see their way out of it. Create true free markets by adopting the BIPCOT No Government License. The BIPCOT No Gov license allows use or modification of any product, service, or software except by governments or government agents. Go to BIPCOT.org. That's Bravo, India, Papa, Charlie, Oscar, Tango.org.
In 1999, Darryl W. Perry began a search for traditional values, which led him down a path to the ideas of liberty. He tells the story in A Rebel's Journey, My Path to Liberty. Of the book, Dr. Brian Sovereign says, sometimes it's funny, and sometimes I think it's crazy, but it's always authentic. Find A Rebel's Journey, My Path to Liberty by Darryl W. Perry on Facebook, read reviews on Amazon, ask for A Rebel's Journey wherever books are sold, or visit arebelsjourney.com.
Hi, this is Davi Barker from ShinyBadges.com, and you're listening to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio with Darryl W. Perry.
Hey, welcome back to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio, online at fppradio.com. Getting back into the questions here in just a moment, but before we do, I want to make sure that I tell you about the wonderful people at Roberts & Roberts Brokerage. Since 1977, Roberts & Roberts Brokerage has been a trusted source for buying and selling precious metals like gold and silver. They also take Bitcoin for precious metal purchases and have permanently removed the minimum purchase amount for all orders paid in the digital currency. So call Roberts & Roberts Brokerage today for knowledgeable advice on buying and selling precious metals and a forward-thinking approach to new technologies. 800-874-9760. That's 800-874-9760. Or visit them online at rrbi.co. That's rrbi, as in Roberts & Roberts Brokerage Incorporated, .co. rrbi.co. Continuing with the questions, and this is one that I knew would take a little bit of time, and will likely take the rest of the show. Question is, what are your thoughts on the mutualist economic and political system? And there's a short answer to this, and then there's a long answer to this. So what are my thoughts? I don't have a lot, but that's partly because I've never studied the mutualist economic political system. And I don't know how many people listening have also not studied the mutualist economic and political system. Now, I'll just preface by saying that you could probably call my political ideology voluntarist fits. I've also heard the term panarchist, meaning that whatever sort of, political system that you want to have, you can have, just don't force it on anybody else. So if somebody wanted to start a, mutualist enclave somewhere, as long as it was all voluntary, go for it. Now, again, that does not answer the question of what is mutualism? Well, I've gone to a website that my guess is they're not going to try to lie about what mutualism is. The website is themutualist.com, and they actually have a page on their site titled, "What is Mutualism?" Link will be in the show notes. The website says mutualism is a family of socialist ideologies that assert that liberating the working class involves allowing them to have full access to the rewards of their their labor, full autonomy in determining how they labor, and that large organizations must embrace economic democracy to facilitate the communication of information workers will deem necessary to get the full reward of their labor. So let me see if I can sort of, break this down a little bit. So mutualism is a form of socialism that would give workers, quote unquote, full access to the rewards of their labor. They don't necessarily define that here. So does that mean that if someone who's working in some, mutualist-owned workers' collective, co-op, whatnot, puts in, let's say, 20 hours on building a product? Doesn't matter what the product is. Let's, put in 20 hours building a product. They sell the product for $100. According to this definition of mutualism, it seems to me that the person would then want to claim all $100 for themselves and not deduct any of the money for expenses, any money for any overhead, any money that went towards supplies. They don't want to invest any of the money back in. They want, quote, the full reward, full access to the reward of their labor. They also want full autonomy in determining how they labor, and I can understand that. I think that's why a lot of people decide to freelance stuff. So then instead of being necessarily at the whim of a manager who decides, oh yeah, you're working third shift this week, or you're working second shift, and can change your schedule at their leisure, people will freelance, and then they have the ability to more or less set their own schedule. Also says that large organizations must embrace economic democracy to facilitate the communication of information workers will deem necessary to get the full reward of their labor. I think there's a word missing somewhere in this sentence fragment, and I don't know what economic democracy means. Now, I know what the word economics means, and I know what the word democracy means, but economic democracy, I don't necessarily understand. Continuing, it says, mutualism belongs to the libertarian family of socialist ideologies. Mutualists tend to support either a small state or an anarchy. Now, the only way that you can have something like this that would wind up enforcing that everyone must be allowed to determine how and when they work and then get the full rewards would be through some kind of state thing, I think. I know that socialism as a voluntary thing has been tried before, hint, hint, Jamestown, and it didn't work out. Stay tuned. There's more here on Peace, Love, Liberty Radio.
Cell 411 is a free app for Android and iOS that replaces government-controlled 911. Cell 411 allows you to preset a group of friends or private organizations to show up in any emergency. Cell 411 is a nightmare for the state because it proves their so-called services aren't needed. Cell 411 has had thousands of installs, and of course it's covered by the BIPCOT no government license. Cell 411 because your friends won't shoot you when you're in trouble. Without the government, who would build the emergency services? You and Cell 411. Get it today at getcell411.com. That's getcell411.com.
When you hear the word lobbyist, you probably think about greedy corporations, but not all lobbyists are the same. Some are fighting for the freedoms you hold dear. Liberty Lobby LLC is doing just that in New Hampshire, working hard to represent you, not some special interest group. You can help by going to libertylobby.info, where your contribution will give us the tools we need to ensure that your voice is heard. Visit libertylobby.info today to find out more.
You're listening to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio with Darryl W. Perry.
Welcome back to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio, online at fppradio.com. Darryl, what are you talking about that Jamestown tried socialism and it didn't work? Yeah, for the first several years of the Jamestown settlement, and also for a couple years in Plymouth, because apparently the settlers in Plymouth did not get the news from Jamestown, or maybe they just thought, well, we can do it better. There was, a form of socialism. They didn't call it socialism. I believe they called it communalism, to where everything was communally owned. And everybody got, from their something to their something. So, everybody got basically the same amount, regardless of how much effort they put into doing anything. And it wound up failing because then it removed the incentive for people to want to work more, produce more. Because, well, why should I put in more labor if I'm going to be rewarded the same as the person that sits on their butt and hasn't done anything in 6 months? Where's the fairness there? And so, the socialism experiments have wound up failing. So when I say that, this won't work, it's not me just thinking it won't work. It's me being able to look at historical examples of not working. Continuing on, Mutualists claim to advocate for free markets. Quote, though differing families within Mutualist thought differ in how they define a free market. This difference is primarily because different economic frameworks are utilized to understand how economic systems work. And there's much more in here, but just to reiterate, the question was, what do you think of the mutualist economic system? And I began by saying not much, and that's not a slight at mutualism. That's just to say I haven't thought about it much, and now that I've read about it just a little bit, it doesn't seem like something that I personally would embrace. But if you want to be a mutualist in some mutualist collective somewhere, go for it. Just don't force other people to do it. Everything should be voluntary, and that means, complete consent. The whole thing of, governments exist with the consent of the governed. But yet they claim that, the fact that you exist in territory that they claim ownership over is your consent is no different than a schoolyard bully saying you consent to be picked on because you're in the playground. We're out of time for today. We'll be back Monday, and don't forget, every Friday I answer your questions. Send those over ama@fppradio.com.
The podcasts of FPP Radio are licensed under Copy Heart. We believe that copying is a form of flattery and do not abide by the copyright laws. Those laws serve to restrict the flow of ideas which no one can really own. Copying is an act of love. Love is not subject to law. If you enjoy the show, consider joining the Fans program and get perks like ad-free versions of Peace, Love, Liberty Radio and FPP Radio News, and also get a copy of the monthly newspaper FPP News. To learn more or to join the Fans program, visit fans.fppradio.com.